That old man upstairs, he wears a crooked smile, staring down at the chaos he created. He said, "Son, if you ain't having fun yet, just wait a little while. Mom's gonna wash it all away, and she thinks that mercy is overrated." I often hear man-made climate change deniers argue that out-of-season weather occurrences have always happened throughout history, and even in the recent past, which is true, as nature can often be unpredictable, and weather patterns can sometimes deviate from the norm. However, the rare occurrences that these climate deniers speak of are often anomalies that happen once every 25 to 50 years, or even once in a century, according to meteorologists, climatologists, and historians. Whereas in the last 10 to 15 years, we have witnessed an undeniable increase in global temperatures, droughts, floods, destructive hurricanes, blizzards, and wildfires throughout the US and the rest of the world, and have also begun to see increasing numbers of weather anomalies in the Midwest, making these occurrences less anomalous and more the norm. The argument that these types of anomalies are unrelated to man-made activity and are based on nature alone is becoming less like an argument and more like a fantasy based on ignorance and denial. Man-made climate change is real. We need to alter our individual and collective lifestyles and vote for carbon emission regulations within existing industry practices. For those who don't know, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a report in 2021 and concluded that climate change is real and is unequivocally being accelerated by man-made carbon emissions. What's more alarming is that global temperatures are increasing even faster than scientists predicted 10 years ago. The UN Climate Change Conference was held in Egypt on November 7, 2022, the day I wrote this, and the message from the UN climate chief was dire. All first world nations must correct the causes of CO2 emissions, or all nations will perish together. If you don't know how weather, climate, and global warming works, let me break it down for you. And I am not trying to be condescending. I am simply trying to share information and to educate in the way that I know how. First, weather is the state of the atmosphere at a place and time in regards to heat, dryness, sunshine, wind, rain, etc. Whereas climate refers to general weather conditions prevailing in an area over a long period, like centuries or millennia. Climate change refers to the increasing changes in the measure of climate over a long period of time, including precipitation, temperature, and wind patterns. Global warming refers to the rise in global temperatures due mainly to the increasing concentrations of greenhouse gases, carbon emissions, in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and chlorofluorocarbons are greenhouse gases. Some of these gases occur organically in nature, but are currently being produced on a mass scale by man-made activities such as landfill decomposition, modern agricultural practices, livestock production, and vehicle and industry factory emissions. Increases in levels of greenhouse gases over the last 200 years have tipped the dynamic relationship between carbon dioxide and the Earth's radiated heat out of balance, trapping additional heat and raising Earth's average temperature. An increase in the man-made output of all of these greenhouse gases is what is trapping heat on the planet and causing global temperatures to rise, leading to an increase in droughts, floods, hurricanes, and wildfires. And no, we're not being punished by God because of homosexuality, abortions, or a lack of God in our culture, like some people think. Although, if all of us did place a higher value on the spiritual, perhaps, and less on the material, we may be better off overall. What we are seeing are the consequences of individualism, unbridled capitalism, overconsumption, wealth hoarding, and greed. And if you consider any of these qualities sins, then perhaps we are witnessing the reciprocal nature of the physical universe and God in a more immediate sense, because we are out of harmony with ourselves and the earth, which are both God's creations. Historically, climate change happens gradually, over periods of tens or even hundreds of thousands of years. Whereas over the last 200 years, or since the Industrial Revolution, when humans began using fossil fuels, such as coal, oil, and natural gas, to power factories, vehicles, and produce plastics, the global temperature, as well as the amount of chemicals and plastics in our air and water, has increased faster than in any other century in recorded human history. In the last decade alone, the global temperature has increased incrementally every year in many parts of the world, and has increased 1.5 degrees globally over the last 50 years. This may not seem like much, But just think about how much difference 1.5 degrees makes in regulating the temperature of the human body. In this way, we can think of the Earth as a living organism that has a slight fever, which will get worse if what is causing the fever isn't addressed very soon. The larger global climate is made up of smaller interdependent ecosystems, and as more of these ecosystems are altered by man-made activity, the more out of balance the Earth's global ecosystem will become. As shifts in local climates become irreversible, glaciers melt and ocean currents accelerate off their natural course. The current global increase in temperature leads to unpredictable weather patterns that often cause abnormal accumulations of precipitations in some parts of the world, and extremely high temperatures and droughts in other parts of the world. And, although fluctuations in weather patterns are normal in most parts of the world, the recurring levels of divergence from normal weather patterns have been extreme over the last 20 years, causing more and more unpredictable weather-related disasters. In addition, we are seeing higher frequencies of hurricanes and monsoons as well as fast-melting glaciers, which will inevitably raise the coastal sea levels, making even more regions and cities around the country and the rest of the world uninhabitable over the next 50 years. So if you think immigration is bad now, just wait until more equatorial regions of the world become uninhabitable and coastal cities are receded by water. Eventually, more and more people will be displaced until there is nowhere left to go. Turn on the news or look online, and unless you are oblivious or blind, you will see that over the last year alone, temperatures in Washington, British Columbia, and Canada have reached 105 to 110 degrees, while the list of active wildfires destroying wildlife and homes in many towns in the US, Canada, Italy, and Greece is too many to mention in this one commentary. In addition, there have been hundreds of lives lost in floods and tornadoes throughout the United States, Germany, and China within the last year, causing irreplaceable damage to towns, villages, agriculture, and commerce. For some climate change deniers, the conversation is turning from one formerly steeped in stubborn denial and political conspiracy to one of blameless indifference and an attitude of, well, it's too late now, what can I do? Might as well be happy and live life. Or, if it's God's will, then there's nothing we can do about it. In my opinion, this attitude does not reflect God's will. Instead, it reflects ignorance, irresponsibility, selfish immaturity, and a mentality lacking in stewardship, brotherhood, and grace. On the other side of this issue, those of us who have been arguing the merits of scientific facts surrounding climate change and voting for regulations in carbon emission reduction for the last 30 years are left with little solace in saying, I told you so, as all humans will suffer in one way or another if we don't change our course. Unfortunately, the poor will suffer the most as the wealthy and upper classes hoard resources as long as they can. For the last 200 years, or up until the beginning of the 21st century, humans have been unknowingly contributing to our climate crisis. But, for the last 30 years, there has been ample evidence proving the error in our ways. Yet we stubbornly refuse to accept the science and alter industry practices, as well as individual and collective lifestyles. It should be recognized that fossil fuels and 20th century industry practices did, at one time, help the United States and its allies win 2 wars against fascism, as well as facilitate major advancements in medicine, agriculture, transportation, and food production. But, for the last 30 years, or since the majority of the scientific community began agreeing that man-made climate change is real, many people have been in denial or ignoring the truth. We are altering the Earth's climate, and if we don't reduce carbon emissions today, humans will not survive the predicted global climate shift by 2100. Most of our energy independence and economic success is a result of extracting, harnessing, hoarding, and exhausting fossil fuels, which will eventually be gone. However, the answer may not be as simple as banning fossil fuel extraction and consumption altogether. After all, hundreds of thousands of workers and our larger economy all depend on our current system of production, transportation, and commerce. And it's understandable that certain communities made up of co-workers, for example, are opposed to transitioning away from reliance on certain forms of energy, because it means that they will be out of a job or will be forced to learn new industry practices or even go back to school at an older age. More realistically, the answer may be to use the advantages we now have from fossil fuels to invest in other forms of energy before it's too late. The infrastructure bill and clean energy plan that Joe Manchin killed, based on what he thought his constituents needed, was a huge blow to the forward movement away from fossil fuels, and was influenced by a misguided and short-sighted fear, based on his own political standing, in my opinion. As the polls show that the majority of Senator Manchin's constituents actually believe man-made climate change is real and support a shift towards cleaner forms of renewable energy, as long as they remain employed. I sincerely don't judge or blame people who choose their job and family over making sacrifices for the long-term health of the planet, because we're all guilty of contributing to the problem. No matter how righteous we think we are as woke consumers, we are all still a part of an economic pseudo-superorganism called the global energy market that it is virtually impossible to escape from. Unless you manage to live completely off the grid, grow your own food without electricity, and walk everywhere, which in this day and age of 325 million Americans is seemingly impossible to do without extreme levels of dedication, you are part of this fossil fuel superorganism, and everything you buy and almost everything you do affects people all around the world, just as much as your decisions and activities affect your local community. It is an inescapable reality that your daily purchases, transportation decisions, and waste disposal practices affect everyone else in the world, as well as thousands of other species. That being said, there are responsible and ethical ways to navigate this reality. We are all responsible for our fellow man, and we have no one to blame for our current situation but ourselves. Still, there are those in power who are more to blame than the average consumer, as they refuse to invest in transition from fossil fuel-based manufacturing into cleaner forms of energy, while milking every last ounce of dirty energy from the earth for profit, even though they've had the technology to transition to clean energy for the last 3 decades. After all, it was the fossil fuel industry's energy researchers who first confirmed the causal relationship between carbon emissions and man-made climate change almost 30 years ago, and then were silenced by private industry and government until the larger scientific community caught up. It is a fact that the global population creates 30% of carbon emissions, while the largest 100 corporations are responsible for creating an overwhelming 70% of carbon emissions from auto manufacturing, agriculture, lumber cutting, factory farming, plastics, and beef production. So, even if we as individuals reduce our carbon footprint by driving electric vehicles, which require lithium and other precious metals, biking, taking public transit, reusing bags, not buying plastic, eating less meat, and composting and recycling, we are still only reducing carbon emissions by a small yet essential amount. This is why it is imperative to the survival of our species that we vote for carbon emission regulations and push for these corporations to transition to cleaner forms of production today, not tomorrow, and not 5 years from now. This is the most important issue of our time. Period. So whatever your political beliefs are, please vote for representatives that will hold corporations accountable to cleaner production standards, and also vote with your dollar. Even if you are still not convinced that humans have influenced and accelerated climate change through human activity, and you think that an asteroid could destroy the Earth at any time and humans have no control over our collective destiny, so we might as well live the way we have been living, wouldn't you at least prefer that soil and air and water be cleaner and healthier while we are here? It just makes more sense to be in harmony with the Earth while we are here. After all, God did create heaven and earth, and it is my belief that when we are in disharmony with the earth and all of God's creatures, through continued acts of greed, lust for power, selfishness, gluttony, and apathy towards our fellow man, we are also in disharmony with God and ourselves. Climate scientists predict that if we completely eliminate carbon emissions today, the Earth's temperature will still continue to increase by 1 to 3 degrees for at least another decade. And if we don't do anything at all, the Earth's temperature will increase by 5 to 6 degrees by the turn of the next century, leaving the majority of the Earth uninhabitable. Think of that slight fever I was talking about in the human body, and imagine a fever of 104 or 105 degrees. That's a sick person. The body creates fevers to kill infection, and that is essentially what the Earth will do unless we work to restore harmony. This will take major sacrifices, but it will also create abundant opportunities for growth and hundreds of thousands of jobs over time. There is always hope. I know it's been said 1,000 times before, but please, recycle, compost, use natural soaps and cleaners, ride a bike, take public transportation when you can, buy a fuel-efficient vehicle, buy sustainably sourced produce and meat, grow your own food if possible, bring your own bag and reuse bags, stop buying and using plastics or buy and use less, research solar, wind, and geothermal energy, and most importantly, please vote for representatives who support transitions to cleaner, more sustainable forms of industry and energy. Please. Thank you for watching. Much love to you and your families. Peace.